In this video, we're going to start looking at the process of rigging a character for animation. The standout feature of Moho is its powerful and intuitive tools for creating very versatile character rigs that make the animation process much less tedious. The most basic part of rigging is setting up bones. So let's look at the tools we use to set up our character's bones. First of all, we need to create a bone group and put all the artwork layers for the character inside it. There's already a root group for the character here, so I'm going to right-click and choose Convert to Bone. Then, with the bone group layer selected, we get access to this palette of bone tools for building the skeleton for our character. Let's try these out by rigging this character. The exact way you use bones will depend on your character's design. But for this video, we're just focusing on learning how the bone tools themselves work. First, we need the Add Bone tool. With this, you just click and drag to draw out a bone. For a character, you generally want to make a root bone at the hips of the character. This is the bone that is just used to move the whole character around, not specific body parts. It's a good idea to have it sticking out like this to make it easy to grab. Now notice that up on the toolbar, you can give your bones a name as you go to help you select them later. Your character will probably end up having a lot of bones, so this is a good idea. Now let's keep going, making the bones for the legs, putting the joints wherever we want the character to be able to bend. If you have a shape that you want to bend, be aware of where your control points are on the artwork layers. You're going to want a control point directly on either side of the joint. If you draw a bone wrong, you can use this tool here, the Transform Bone tool, to adjust it. Now here on frame 0, this will define the default position and size of the bone, but later, when you're out on the timeline animating, this Transform tool will stretch and rotate the bones and the artwork bound to them. Now before we move on to the other leg, I'm going to make sure each of these bones has a name. So I'm going to use the Select Bone tool to select each of them and then fill in its name. When you want to continue drawing bones, you want to make sure it's connected to the right parent bone, so you want to select its parent first. You can use the Select Bone tool, or if you're already using another tool, you can just hold the Alt key to temporarily get the Select tool. If you ever do accidentally draw a bone that's attached to the wrong parent, you can use this tool, the Reparent Bone tool, to fix it. These arrows show you what bone is parented to what, and if you need to change something, just Alt-click to select the bone, and then click the bone you want to be its parent. If you don't want a bone to have a parent, select it and then click an empty part of the scene. So I'm just going to go through and finish out the rest of the bones for this character. Now, after you have bones, the next thing you might want to do is use the Bone Strength tool. This region around the bone defines the portion of the artwork that the bone has influence over when it flexes the artwork at the joints. Click and drag left or right on a bone to increase or decrease the strength of the bone. In most cases, you want to scale this area to just fit inside the part of the body that it's meant to control. Focus especially on what it's overlapping near the joints. There are also cases where you might want to bring this all the way down to 0 strength. Like for example, the root bone doesn't need any strength. Now you might need to experiment to find the right strength. To actually move the bones to see how it affects the character, you can use the Manipulate Bone tool. If we try to use this now, we see we get a lot of distortion. This is because right now the bones on the main bone group are treating everything in the group as one piece of artwork. What we need to do before this will work is bind specific layers to specific bones. The main way you'll generally do this is called flexi binding. This method lets a set of bones distort a layer of artwork to bend at the joints, even if there's only a single layer of artwork. For example, with the leg here, I have a single layer for the leg, and we want it to be affected by these two bones. So to bind that layer to those bones, we keep the layer selected, And we need our bone selection tool. Then shift click to select both bones and move up to the bone menu and choose use selected bones for flexi binding. And that has a keyboard shortcut because you're going to be using this command a lot. Now, if we switch back to the manipulate bone tool and try to move the leg again, there's still some distortion because we need to do that for all the other layers as well. I'm just going to quickly go through and bind all the layers to the right bones. Oops, I made a mistake here binding the neck. I accidentally had the hand bone still selected. To fix that, with the neck layer selected, I'm going to go to the bone menu and go to reset all bone rigging. Then I can select just the bones I want to bind. And now if we try the leg again, just the leg bends along with the bones. But you can see there's some distortion around the bend that might not look how you want. You can try to correct this by adding additional points to the layer at or around the bend, or adjusting the bone strength. But in a case like this, where we have two bones in a straight line, we should select the layer that they're bound to, and then select the two bones and come up to Bone, Create Smooth Joint for Bone Pair. And then it will try to bend it like there's a proper round joint there. That's a lot closer to what we want. Now, to really get bends like this to work correctly, you'll want to set up a smart bone, which we'll look at in one of the next videos. Then the next type of binding is layer binding. This is actually the most simple. Layer binding is good for cases where you don't want or need the artwork to be distorted by the bone and just move and rotate along with the bone. For example, in the case of the head group here, flexi binding doesn't really look right. We've got a bunch of individual pieces of artwork inside this group, all of which, including the head itself, don't need to change shape, they just need to move along with the bone for the head and the neck chain. Any animation we do within the face should be independent of the motion of the head bone. So let's just layer bind the head group by selecting the group, and then over here in the Tools palette, this is the Bind Layer tool. Then we just need to click on the right bone. Now if we move that bone, the head just moves along with it. And actually, let's layer bind the back hair layer too. So now that layer moves along with the head as well. The last way you might bind artwork to your bones is point binding. This lets you bind individual points of a shape to different bones. So you could select exactly the bones you want to be affected by one bone versus another. Let's look at an example where you might do that. So look here at the neck layer. Right now it's flexi bound to the chest and neck bones. You can see those are highlighted in green. If I move it, it gets out of alignment up at the top. That's because of how the bone strength is working. If I clear its binding, and then bind it just to the neck bone, now the bottom of the neck rotates along with the bone. So let's use point binding to attach just the bottom points of the neck to the chest bone. So with the neck layer selected, I use the Bind Points tool here. Then I hold Alt to select the bone I want to bind to, make a selection of points, and then up top, click the Bind Points button. Then these points get color-coded blue to match the bone they're bound to. And now, when I bend the neck, those points stay locked in place. We can do some other cool tricks too. For example, say the character has a skirt, and I haven't bound this to any bones yet. I want to do the hip bone first. Now I can select the points that I want to move along with the character's hips, and then click Bind Points. Now you can see by the color coding that these points are bound to this bone, Now for the bottom of the skirt, I want that to move along with the legs. So I'll select the first thigh bone, then select the points and bind points. Then I'll do the same for the other leg. And now when I move the character's legs, the skirt stretches to match, like how a real skirt would. You may always still need to adjust the skirt by hand when actually animating, but this puts you in a really good starting position. So those are the basics of creating bones and the 3 different binding types: flexi binding, layer binding, and point binding. But there are some more advanced ways you can customize your bones in the Bone Constraints menu up here. We'll look at these in the next video. I'll see you there.